And welcome, everybody. Thank you for spending this evening with us. I will be walking us through another episode of Road to the Midterms, and we are going to be talking about the Great Commonwealth of Virginia in 2021. We have a lot of projects at Center for Common Ground. We are a 501c3, so that means all the work that we do is nonpartisan. So we have our intern program, Students for Justice, and we have Abe, who is a graduate of Students for Justice, who is joining us tonight. We have so many people on tonight who are part of our Reclaim Our Vote campaign, where we sent 9.4 million postcards, made 1.7 million phone calls, and sent 2.9 million texts. We run billboard projects, and for the first time in history, I will need to do a billboard project in Virginia because we are going to have to get historic turnout. We have an RV, and the RV made numerous trips to Georgia. We are considering another vehicle because the RV may need to head to out west, where there are going to be votes on the Equal Rights Amendment. We also are a technology house where we have our texting program, Text%, which we have retired because of 10DLC. When that is resolved, we might unretire it. We also have VoteForce, which is another one of our technology projects. And we also now have democracy centers. And one of the images in your upper right of all the folks standing around big block is in South Carolina, and that democracy center is producing clean water from the sun because the residents of the community need clean drinking water. So those are our projects. Our mission remains the same: to empower underrepresented voters to fully participate in democracy. And I've already gone through the numbers that our volunteers did last year in terms of outreach to voters. So we reached out to 14 million voters last year. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the primary election results in Virginia. We're going to be looking at how many registered voters and what those registered voters look like in Virginia. What does the Virginia voting population look like? We are going to take a look at the Virginia State Legislature. And tonight I am joined by Stephen Rosenfeld, and we will temporarily leave Virginia and look at another state where some amazingly odd work is going on. We will be looking at what's happening in Arizona with the recount of the recount of the recount. Now, on Tuesday, Virginia had her primary election. It was the most diverse group of candidates that the Democrats have ever put together for governor. Ultimately, the candidate that won was the former governor, Governor Terry McAuliffe. And as you can see, it was a resounding win. with 62.16% of the vote. For on the Republican side, I want you to notice the numbers. The man who won, Glenn Youngkin, he won with only 6,800 votes. And that is because the Republicans in Virginia normally do not run primary elections, especially for their statewide offices or even their congressional offices. They like to very closely control who gets to choose their candidates. So on the 6th round of balloting, they chose Glenn Youngkin. Youngkin is a multi-millionaire, and he is a hedge fund manager. Now, this is what's going to make this race interesting, and this is what is going to require absolutely amazing, probably the highest turnout we have ever gone for in Virginia. There are 3 independent candidates running. Princess Blanding is a Black Lives Matter candidate, and many progressives are going to throw in behind Princess Blanding. One of the problems that the former governor is going to have is he comes with a lot of baggage. He is the major friend and benefactor and gift giver to Dominion Energy and Altria. Dominion Energy is the most hated corporation in Virginia. He also brought pipelines into Virginia, and he is also a major corporatist. So that means it's going to be interesting in Northern Virginia because that's where all the progressives are, and there's a lot of them, and they don't like Terry. It's going to mean in areas where there are pipelines and there are people fighting the pipelines, they're not going to like Terry. So it's going to be interesting. There's also a number of women that don't like Terry because many of us believed we were going to have the opportunity to not only have the first female governor in Virginia's history, we were going to have the opportunity to have the first woman of color governor in Virginia. So identity politics is going to be everything in this election. It was everything in this primary. Now, Paul Davis and Brad Froman are also running as independents. Paul Davis is a libertarian. Brad Froman doesn't say what he is. He could be a regular independent. So what does this mean? Independent candidates, if they are running on an issue or if they are running as an alternative, give people the ability to vote within their party, but for a more progressive or sometimes regressive candidate, and they didn't cross party lines. Now, parties in Virginia get to be very interesting because no one registers as a Democrat or a Republican. Everybody, according to Virginia, is an independent. So that always makes it very interesting when you're trying to predict which way the electorate is going to go. So the Republicans limited their voters to 14,000 voters. The Democrats had slightly more. Now, for lieutenant governor, the women realized when Terry McAuliffe entered the race that there was probably not really going to be an opportunity to directly get a woman going in as the gubernatorial candidate. So Hala Ayala, who's a current delegate was on the ticket. And what it looks like when we look at the numbers is she did well all around the state. She had her own following, and there is a huge women's network and women's movement in Virginia. They got behind Hala. Now, Sam Razul, who came in second, immediately stepped up and said, I will put my support behind Hala and I will work to get Hala elected. So as you can see, with 37% of the vote, she performed very, 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 very well. On the lieutenant governor's side, they chose Winsome Sears, an African-American woman from Hampton Roads. As we look at the Republican ticket, we can see that it is very strategically arranged. They have a white man for governor. They have a Black woman for lieutenant governor. And they have, I'll come to that in a minute, we have the Attorney General and our incumbent Attorney General won. For the Republicans, their Attorney General choice is Delegate Jason Myers, who is Latino. So they have racially a very diverse ticket, and in terms of age, a relatively young ticket. Whereas on the Democratic side, they have two older white men and a youngish Latina woman. So they very much wanted to make sure they did not have an all-male ticket. So I know there's a lot of people who vote in primaries in Virginia who really try to be strategic with their vote. So that's who we have running. Now, who voted and what did the turnout look like? Well, Terry McAuliffe got the greatest number of votes of any single candidate at 303,000, or as I said, 62% of the vote. In the governor's race, 488,123 votes were cast. For lieutenant governor, we had fewer votes, about 14,000 fewer votes. And Hala got 178,000 votes. And then the Attorney General, Mark Herring, 271,035 votes. And his total for Attorney General race was 478,000, roughly about 10,000 less than what we saw for governor. So everybody did not go all the way down the ticket, but it was pretty even for our three statewide offices. Now, in Virginia, there are 5,401,651 voters. So a very small percentage of Virginia voters, literally slightly less than 10%, made the choice of who was going to be on the ticket. Now, it's not that bad. When I originally saw that number, I was like, this is really, really bad. So then I went and historically looked out at turnout in primary elections. Now, in 2015, our primary turnout was 68,102. 2015 was equivalent to our midterms. That was when Virginia had 47 seats where no Democrat even ran. So those numbers make perfect sense for where and who we were. Contrast that to 2017, when grassroots groups took over GOTV for election, and we hit a high of 400 and actually 500,000 voters for the 2017 primary. We had less voters show up in 2019. Again, remember, 2019 is equivalent to our midterms, but that turnout was enough to give us 8 new seats in the Virginia General Assembly. And in 2020, the numbers on the far right are the general election numbers. In 2020, our last election, Virginia turned out 4.5 million voters of our 5.4 million voters. I am going to take a guess and say, if we want the top of the Virginia ticket to remain as it is, we are going to need to turn out somewhere between 2.5 and 2.7 million voters. All right. So what we did in 2019 is not really going to work. Not even what we did in 2017. We are going to need more voters. Now, what's Virginia look like? I made this really pretty for you. 72% of Virginia is non-community of color, so 3.9 million voters. African-American voters, we're at 900,000. And as I said on the slide, these are all registered voters. So they're 16.67% of the population. And as you can see, when I say consistent voters, these are voters where whenever there's an election, they show up. So you notice the consistent voters number is always significantly lower than the number of people who can vote. Asian American voters, 4.37% of the population, 91,000 are consistent voters. Hispanic voters, larger population than our Asian voters, 239,000 or 4.42%, 80,000 consistent voters. We only have a tiny number of Native American voters, but when you look at consistent voters, they are definitely winning the prize. Out of 465 registered voters, 223 never missed an election. And this is just the summary of what I went through on individual slides. 28% of Virginia voters are voters of color. Now, our priority counties for where turnout is going to need to reach historic heights: Fairfax, Prince William, Northern Virginia; Henrico, Central Virginia; Loudoun, Northern Virginia; Richmond, Central Virginia; Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads, Chesterfield, Central Virginia; Norfolk, Newport News, Hampton, Hampton Roads. So we are going to need a significant number of voters. Right now, this is what the Virginia State Legislature looks like. There are no senators that are up for re-election, but the entire House of Delegates is up for re-election. So you can see that in the House, we are 55 Dems to 45 Republicans. Virginia had a great legislative session, passing the most voter expansion legislation of number one any state, and literally at any time in Virginia's history. Now, when we look at the bills that were sponsored, In 2021, 67% of the legislation that Democrats introduced passed. When we look at the Senate, 72% of the legislation that they entered actually passed. I want to invite everybody to come back and join us for a celebration next week, and it will be educational. It will give you an opportunity to look at 4 generations of Black civil rights activists. My mentor will be joining us, Dr. William Ferguson Reed. Fergie was one of the co-founders of the Crusade for Voters in Virginia. And he started that in 1954. That was the year I was born. I will take up the 2nd generation. Fergie, by the way, is 96 years young. I will take up the 2nd generation. Cliff Albright of Black Voters Matter will be generation 3. And Evan Marlborough of Georgia, the Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project, and Peaches to the Polls will be the 4th generation. So please join us. It will be fun. It will be educational. And I would love for everybody to meet Fergie. Fergie is still very active, and he worked on recruiting candidates in conservative districts in Virginia, because Fergie taught me a very, very important and basic lesson about elections. When you don't have a candidate, you lose. So we made sure that we had candidates for virtually every seat. So now that's enough for Virginia. That's enough for inviting everybody to join us again next week. And what I'd like to do is, Josie, are you here? Do you want to give a quick report on what is going on with legislation in the various states? I think Arizona just went home, and I know we're doing a lot of work on the For the People Act S1. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to make you a co-host so you can unmute your microphone. You're good to go.
I don't know if you wanted to answer the questions in the chat first. Otherwise, I'm happy to hop into the federal legislation stuff.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, Hampton Roads is the lion's share of Virginia's vote. The Hampton Roads in Northern Virginia. And yes, we have to have a bigger focus on Hampton Roads than we've ever had before. The goal for turnout in the November election is going to be between 2.5 and 2.7 million voters. That's the goal. The percentage of eligible people of color in Virginia, that is 28%. That was on the slide. And we have Steph here from Virginia Beach going, yes, yeah, we can do this. Go, Steph. All right, I think I got the chat. Josie, it is yours.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Josie. So for on the state and for a legislative update, Arizona, I think actually just came back from leaving session or something. They keep going back and forth. They do still have some voter restrictive, voter suppressive legislation floating around, but not much is really moving there. So we're not really doing too much on the state level anymore, or at the moment, and really putting all of our energy behind S1, the For the People Act. As many of you probably know, it is most likely going to face a vote come the week of June 21st. So despite Manchin's little op-ed over the weekend, we are not giving up hope. We're actually putting up the heat as it gets warmer here, and we are going to make sure we do everything we can to get S1 passed. So a big part of that means, at least at the moment, our Arizona phone banks have expanded to include Mark Kelly, just because we don't really know where he stands on the filibuster. And we should give him some love as well. And probably starting next week, we are going to release a texting campaign that everybody and anybody in the country can sign up for. It's one that you subscribe to, and you'll get a daily reminder to call your own senator and ask them to protect your freedom to vote by, one, voting for the People Act, and voting to amend the filibuster to ensure it actually becomes law. So once that is set up, we will send out an email to folks to sign up for this. The goal of it really is, even though there are key states and senators that we want to target and push, at this point, we really need everybody and anybody talking about the For the People Act. Yeah, so that's what we're doing at the moment. HR 4, once that's introduced, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, that will be on our radar, and we will be doing work around that. And yeah, I think that's kind of it. I know I went through that quickly, so if you have any questions, please let me know.
All right, thanks, Josie. And Alice Smith left a message in the chat saying her simple message to all senators is that the same rules should apply to a voter in West Virginia, Connecticut, North Dakota, and California when it comes to minimum standards for time, place, and manner of voting for the President of the United States, a U.S. Senator, or a U.S. Representative. And again, the basic question, why should a voter in West Virginia have different rules than somebody living in Connecticut or California as it regards access to the ballot box in a federal election? We already have a uniform National Voter Registration Act. It's time to have a uniform national voter election law. Thank you, Alice, for those very sound words. So now I don't see any more questions in the chat. Let's take a look at an election that has already been run. A very dear friend of mine, reporter Steve Rosenfeld, has joined us tonight to talk to us about what the hell is going on. Oh, hang on. I've got one question. All right. Elsa, did you put your question in the chat? All right, okay. And then, yeah, is there any place online where we can read the entire act? And will we be doing, oh, a whole bunch of questions showed up. Yes, you can read S1, the For the People Act. One of the easiest places to go is congress.gov. And when you go to congress.gov, you can just put in S1. When you put in S1, then it's about a 1,400-page bill. You may not want to read the whole thing. I've done numerous overviews on S1. We do want to support S1. All righty, yeah, it's grown. And yes, we will be postcarding every voter of color in Virginia twice. Virginia has 45 days of early voting. And so we are going to need to continually do outreach to the registered voters of Virginia. We will be texting, we will be postcarding, we will be phone banking, and it will be our goal to touch every community of color voters, that's all 1.6 million of them, at least twice. There will be many voters where we don't have a good phone number. And so that is where postcards really, really, really come in handy, because we always have an address. And that will be for GOTV. Because Virginia has not moved any additional people really off the voting rolls, they basically do it at the end of the last election, the beginning of the year. They're not going to do it again. We are just going to concentrate for the generally on GOTV, because we are going to have to achieve such a massive, massive, massive turnout. All right, yes, the Brennan Center, blah, blah, blah. Understand. Yes. All right. So anyway, I now want to bring up my friend, Steve Rosenfeld. Stephen is a political writer, and his specialty is voting and elections. I'm going to just do a real simple introduction because Stephen is going to have a lot of amazing information to tell us about what is going on in Arizona. And when we talked this afternoon, Stephen, I think we were at, this is the great grandson audit. It's son of audit, son of audit, son of audit. So Stephen Rosenfeld, take it away. I'm so glad you could join me tonight.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. As you can see, this is a hotel room in Phoenix. The colors on the wall match the landscape here. It's about 107 outside. So I cover election administration and voting rights. I've been on these calls before. It's a privilege to speak to all of you. I was in Phoenix a month ago when I don't call it an audit. I call it an exercise. The Arizona Senate, which is a Republican majority Senate, has a lot of constituents who didn't believe that Trump lost. So basically what happened was they were successful in a way that the Trump campaign was not successful in any state after the election. They won in court, and they won the right to subpoena all of the election machinery and records and data in the country's second largest election jurisdiction, which happens to be Maricopa County or Greater Phoenix. So after they won, they had to figure out what to do with all this stuff. And the county, which is run by a board of supervisors with a Republican majority, 4-1, didn't want to help. So they wouldn't let them into the county warehouses, and a series of contractors were hired by the Senate Republican leader. And unfortunately, the lead contractor was somebody who, company Cyber Ninjas from Florida, whose CEO basically had tweeted that he believes in the vote theft conspiracy and all that stuff. So it was not exactly a start of a process that was believed to be run by honest brokers. So what's really happened? You've all read, I'm sure, and heard about how candidates, including from Virginia, have and Georgia and Pennsylvania and Alaska, and I'm losing track, have shown up to and called for copycat audits or in their state where they don't like the results. And what's happened is you have an old basketball arena where the Phoenix Suns used to play that has been rented, and the floor has been filled with hundreds of video cameras and colored tables and matching t-shirts and microscopes and overhead cameras. And I am not making this up. They're spending $4 to $5 million on this. All but 150,000 of that is coming from private donors. 150,000 is coming from the Senate. Nobody's saying who those private donors are, although people have made some pretty educated guesses. Some of that is coming from millionaires, but they're also going after small donations. And they're basically launching a series of investigations or recounts that are really not following the basic rules of accounting. What do I mean by this? The core question is, what are they comparing to what? One of those whats happens to be the official record of the votes that are cast. And there are elements that are building blocks of that. And the formal term is called the cast vote record. So what goes into that? Well, there are a couple of main ingredients. One is the paper ballots. Then those ballots are put through a scanner, and a digital image is made of every side of every ballot. And then software analyzes through a grid system the candidates and the votes, and creates a spreadsheet of subtotals. And those subtotals, like building a pyramid, become the statewide cast vote record. So it's a record of every vote in every race, in every precinct, or every other way that they're cast, such as overseas military, or people with disabilities, so all those variables. So anyway, they're doing a hand count of all the paper, but they are not comparing the results. So the ballots are put in storage boxes and they're pulled out. As they're pulled out, they're separated. They're in 2-inch stacks by colored paper because they're batches of 200. And they're labeled in the numbers. They're not comparing any subtotals along the way of the batches as they come out. We're talking about a semi-trailer load full of pallets of batches, boxes of batches, to the giant spreadsheet. You would think that you would want to do that so that you could basically say, here's a problem and where did it begin? And basically, hey, we need a little bit better poll worker training, or the machine screwed up, or something else. Or if something really was incorrectly, if somebody got into the central management system and started playing with the numbers, you would have a baseline upon which to say, wait a minute, not so fast. It looks like over here, all the candidates that people voted for were not represented in these totals, but they are not doing that. And the reason they're not doing that is they didn't understand, and they just barely have begun. I'm talking like as of a week ago, they didn't understand the data that they had or how to use it. And so they wrote these letters like in mid-May, claiming that the Maricopa County, again, run by Republicans, was withholding data and drives had been erased, and Trump was, saying, weighing in on this, and it was going all this nonsense is rifling around right-wing media, and they had the data. They just didn't know what it was. They didn't know how to open the files. They did not know how to sort through the spreadsheets. And how do I know this? Because people who I have been working with got the data and have been sorting through the spreadsheets and coming up with their own comparisons. So the thing here is, what is being compared to what? So you have a hand count where they're not comparing it to batch subtotals. And when I was there initially, they were writing down things on tally sheets. They weren't even dating the tally sheets. And they had 100 votes per tally sheet. We were talking about 2.1 million votes. And they had 3 copies of each tally sheet, and they weren't being dated, and they weren't being photocopied. And then when they were being put into a computer, they weren't checking for data entry typos. Now, they have fixed all that, or I've tried to work through all that. But the bottom line is what is the quality of the evidence being assembled? And I'm telling you, and it would be funny, except it's not funny, because it's super serious, because people who are looking at the optics just think, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful, let's bring this to. And what is this? A privatized, partisan. It's like in the election world, this is like the equivalent of the storming of the Capitol. It's the barbarians are at the gate, and except they're armed with computers and fancy photographs and all this self-confidence, but they don't know what they are doing. Or they think they know, but they don't really know because they've never done it before. Now then you have another line of inquiry in there, a second set of machines, where every ballot is being put underneath an overhead camera. Each one costs, I'm told, like $5,000, and then a set of 4 microscopes. And what they're doing is they're looking, there's a theory that came out on election night that the Chinese somehow printed 40,000 ballots and smuggled them into the election centers in Maricopa County and swapped them with the legal ballots and got away, and nobody caught them. Now, I am not making this up. So what they are doing is they are taking photographs of every single one of these to see if there are bamboo fibers, as if the Chinese could not buy paper in America, but we won't think about that. Bamboo fibers, and they're comparing to see if the ink marks on the ovals have been made by pens, or they might have been printed with a laser printer. Now, the thing about this is they don't know how many ballots, or now they do know, but initially they did not know how many ballots were printed by laser printers. Because, for example, there are 12,000 or so overseas military ballots that come in by fax and email, and they get printed out, and they have to be remade and copied, and the copies are printed on ballot marking devices, which have are laser printers. So they discover this stuff and they don't know what it is, and then they jump to the worst conclusion imaginable, that the sky is falling, and then maybe they figure it out, or maybe they don't figure it out. So anyway, this is what's going on, and they're not done with all this. They're actually hoping, and inside of this tent, not all Republicans are of the same mind. The former Secretary of State, Ken Bennett, who's gotten a lot of heat for lending his name to this, is actually in a minority in there, where he actually has been pushing to try to have a third. He thinks that hiring the cyber ninjas and doing the hand count was a ridiculous mistake. He wouldn't have done it, and he thinks this other thing, looking for the fibers and all, is just a laughable joke. But he's trying to see what other evidence could be assessed or gathered, and he wants to do what's called like a ballot image audit, which some companies like Clear Ballot have done, where they take a look at the image that was made after ballot is scanned and see how that compares to the results in the calculator, like the tabulation system. And he's getting a lot of opposition from that, from right wingers who basically don't want to have a factual check and balance with this process, because what it looks like they're gearing up for is what we all know. They're going to make some crazy claims, and then Trump's going to take it and make it even more crazy, and this just is never going to end. And but the thing is, inside of this arena, he's kind of become a persona non grata, because the far right wingers who are making a lot of money doing this and want to export it to other states are telling him you can't be a spokesperson anymore, you can't talk to the media anymore. They're trying to shut him up, quite frankly. And basically, this is where things stand right now. They're almost done with this hand count. They need to keep going for another couple of weeks with this, using these this strange overhead photography stuff. Whether or not Ken Bennett will allow there to be or find his way to finesse a ballot image audit is an open question. He wants to do it, but the question is, can he get with the current Senate president and do it outside of the interference of the others, the cyber ninja people? And I really try to dig into what's the evidence here? Because the evidence is the building blocks of trust. So here's the key question that comes back to me, which is, what are people going to believe about any of this stuff? I mean, what are people really going to be? How are we going to change minds for all this crazy shit? When millions and millions of people believe that this thing was stolen, how are you going to change those minds? And where does having better evidence or facts come into this? And I really wrestled with this a lot, because I've been spending my time losing sleep trying to figure out what are they really doing? And I've gotten inside this because there are some progressives who are trying to help these guys, believe it or not, which is, I won't even get into. But but anyway, Bennett believes, he said this to me today, that the facts don't matter, the messengers matter. If it's a trusted messenger and he comes out and says, look, we looked at all this stuff and Biden really won everybody, maybe 90% of the people will believe that, another 10%, another well, we'll accept it. Another 10% will say, what's your evidence? And maybe another, and then he'll talk about that. We'll get in the weeds. And another 2% will say, you're a sellout, you're crazy, and blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, Ken, you're going to take months before you come out with something or you make a public statement. In the meantime, every day there's going to be crazy shit. Like today, for example, the guy who's running for governor, to challenge Kemp in the Republican primary in Georgia, posted an image that was supposed to be a ballot, and he claimed that there was a watermark on it because they had ultraviolet lights to see if there's watermarks on the ballot paper. And he says, see, this is what it is. And this went out on Telegram, and it turns out Ken looked at this. I'm sitting next to him and he goes, this is a forgery. This is not an Arizona ballot, because he pointed in the corner and he said, look, we don't have the state, and a little outline of the state in the corner in orange. Now, where might that have come from? I don't know, but it could have been that the guy in Georgia who won that, who won that litigation to examine their ballots, who I caught lying and wrote about it in November, is working with this same guy Pulitzer, who's got these overhead cameras looking for the forged ballots from China, decided to do a little digital cutting and pasting and then posted something and put it out to their friends, and it's already shared by 50 or 100,000 people. And so the question is, how do you deal with that? And I put this to Ben, this is today. And he basically said, all I can do is believe that I'm still a trusted messenger. And because he just said, the only way you change minds, is through trusted messengers where people might have a change of heart. So, and he knows he's getting the shit kicked out of him on the right and on the left as he's doing all this. And his career in politics is basically over. So that's where that's all at. And it's really, this is remarkable to me, that he would land on, I can still be a trusted messenger, is not very different from the work that you folks have all been doing in terms of quote unquote relational organizing. Who is the trusted messenger? If it's not the Democratic Party, it's or somebody else. So it seems to be like, this is where we are today, given media and disinformation and craziness. So, I appreciate everybody for listening to me go on and on with this. I don't mean to just rant and rave, and I obviously am lost in this silo. And at some points I'll come out and breathe fresh air. But really, you got people who are manufacturing evidence that doesn't add up. That's a problem. What are they going to do and what are they going to say? We don't know, but you can assume it's not going to be good. How do you combat it? I don't know. Maybe if you have trusted messengers who will say, that's not what it is. Maybe Bennett will walk away from this in 2 weeks. He kind of intimated he might, but not for public, not for to be printed yet. And meanwhile, all these other legislators are coming in from other states and saying, we want this here, we want this here. Privatized, partisan, outsourced, like this, the election world's version of storming of the Capitol. And as we see on Telegram today, people are already beginning to forge Arizona ballots. And it might even be somebody who's a contractor working in this operation, doing a little trial balloon. So that's my report. Oh, and by the way, for Josie on the legislation in Arizona, they can't pass a budget. So the people who are trying to hold that up on the Republican side want to attach the draconian voting legislation to the budget bill. And the governor is trying to now see if he can make a deal with Democrats, and that's still in play. So that's my report from Phoenix. Thank you all.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, that is always the ploy when you can't pass a bill 4 or 5 times, figure out a way to stick it in the budget, put it in something that must pass, and then you'll manage to slide it through. Very, very interesting. Well, and again, I'm noticing some people saying this is depressing. In a way, yes, it is. But in another way, it's very, very important that we understand what's going on. We understand why it's going on. And just we are aware that there is a possibility that this could get exported to other states, because of course, Georgia wants to talk about doing this. Georgia, who already did 2 recounts is now talking about, wow, what Arizona did, we need to do that too.
It is depressing. I mean, when I talk to people, it's more than depressing. It's the unraveling of our democracy. The skin of our civilization is pretty darn thin, and it's being really stretched. And people like myself have spent my adult life trying to pursue, accounts of the truth. I know there's no such thing as the final truth in most cases, but, everyone brings their perspectives and all. But, at a certain point, you can reach a certain consensus. I mean, medical science is based on certain facts. You don't just get medicine because it looks pretty. You're not told that you have to do this operation just because someone wants a sailboat, although maybe that happens too. But the point is, where I'm talking to people who are in the election world and they're saying, holy shit, we're at a point where the lies are outracing the facts and nobody cares about the facts anymore. What do we do? And some people think that all you can do is not concede an inch to these people, and don't legitimize any inquiry here whatsoever. Shut it down and ridicule them. And you've certainly heard a lot of that. You've seen a lot of that in CNN, MSNBC, even the New York Times to their extent. But then on the other side of that, if the election administration world or the election professional world actually had more transparent and easily understood, post-election day verification processes and windows, so those who wanted a little more information could not have to be told by an expert, trust us, but seeing might be believing, we might not have this giant vacuum that's filled by all this Trumpian garbage. So there's some of this is not just on the Trumpers, it's on the election administrators, and it's on their profession. And a lot of their profession has adopted policies, quite frankly, from academic bullies who are progressives, and like the Brennan Center. They do not favor more transparent, easily understood post-election audits. They favor these statistical things that you need a math graduate degree to understand, called risk-limiting audits. And that's why it's really crazy. We have an election with no security issues to speak of. And we have the biggest trust issue, deficit of trust in our modern lives. And where is the counterbalance to offset the trust? How do you restore that trust? And we're basically left to, back to we need trusted messenger, which is, I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's kind of where it's at. So again, people were saying this is depressing. Yes, this is a very, very scary time. And I'd like to believe there's an opportunity for everyone, to think wisely and clearly about having a better post-election day process, so that we don't have these fights and all this crazy stuff can just foment out of thin air because there's nothing to say that's crazy. But, in red states and blue states, no legislature has reformed the post-election day period, the challenges, the canvas. They haven't acknowledged that there's greater and more modern data and records that can be used. It's a complete empty set. It just hasn't happened. And we could, there are a lot of reasons why, but anyway, it's not happening. So what instead, this is what's happening. So, I can go in and I can say, yes, this is why it's rather than calling names, I could say, this is why it's not going to add up. This is why their evidence is not good. This is why their process is lax. This is how they're skewering to cover it up with their optics. It's a little better, but on substance, they're really not looking at the key building blocks. And in the meantime, the people on the inside, you have a spectrum of people who are like idealistic and hopeful, like Ken Bennett, to outright, the Trumpian true believers who don't worry about lying and have no conscience about lying, like Doug Logan, and they're grifters. They're out there to make a new business where they're going to make millions of dollars. And again, the number I heard today, this is costing, $4 to $5 million, and they're not disclosing where it's coming from.
Stephen, there's a couple of questions. Well, there's a number of questions in the chat. I'm looking at one where where's the regulatory board, commission, organization, or whatever that monitors and implements election accountability?
Well, it's really, really interesting to notice as a political reporter whose voices you're not hearing from. I really try to pay attention to that. And the Federal Election Assistance Commission, please, where are you? We haven't heard anything. Zero. Now, the Justice Department sent some letters because part of the plan here was that the Trumpers were going to knock on people's doors to see if they actually lived there to quote unquote verify their voter registration information. And they got some letters saying, well, that could be construed as voter intimidation and violate civil rights laws, but they haven't come in to stop this. And as of last week, one of the people who are working there for the Cyber Ninjas, it came out, and I heard about this a different way, that they took all the data from and they brought it to their summer home in Montana to see if they could make sense of this. Now, the thing is, we're talking about, I heard today, 17 terabytes of data. Now, why did they do this? Because they didn't know what they were working with. They were trying to figure it out, but they're crossing interstate lines. That's where the feds tend to step in, especially the Justice Department. If the Justice Department wanted to really do something, you might think that that would be enough because it violates the sense of, ballot custody and election preservation, blah, 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 but they haven't done it. In Arizona, the Secretary of State is a Democrat. She has been highly critical of this, but she's running for governor now. So in a certain sense, she's back in the political mix. So she undermines her ability to be, like an impartial critic. And then literally, again, the county supervisors of Maricopa County are Republicans, but they're getting steamrolled here. They lost in court. They didn't appeal the decision of a state court judge that your records have been subpoenaed to the legislature. So there it is.
Right. Thank you, Stephen. We are literally right at 9 o'clock. So I hope everybody got an education. I know I did. I was aware of a lot of the things going on in Arizona, but Steve, you gave me some new things that I was not really aware of, and even opening up from our conversation this afternoon. We know that Virginia this year, it's going to take all the work. Again, Virginia basically in 2021, think Georgia. It's just Georgia's now moved to Virginia. So we're going to be doing Georgia in Virginia. For the first time in the history of my doing elections, I'm going to be buying billboards in Virginia. So a lot to think about as we look at what is American democracy. It is this wild, crazy, but very, very, very delicate thing. And we are right now in a very, very, very delicate dance to try to make sure that we are able to continue to hold on to democracy as we thought we knew it. So everybody, there are a ton of messages that are in the chat. If you want to save the chat to get the links and be able to read what people said, you can, in the chat, click on the 3 dots down at the very, very bottom, and you will have an option. We let you save the chat. All right. Thank you very much. I've got to save the chat right now. I will be looking at this and then reprocessing a lot of what you said, Steve, because it's going to be pretty darn amazing. And again, as you said, people on one side are just making things up. People on another side are trying to tell the truth. And in the end, it could very well come down to who believes that somebody is a trusted messenger. So they believe them just because they said it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Virginia, there's one big difference between Virginia and Georgia. Virginia is the blue state's voting right champion. They get the gold medal for 2021. So unlike telling a lot of people about, oh, you got to worry about this hurdle, you got to worry about that barrier, instead, you actually have more options. So in some ways, despite this landscape where unfortunately you don't have the best top of the ticket folks to get excited about, you still have a state where the options to participate should be easier. But like anything new, people don't know about it, they won't use it. So there again, it's a more positive place to start, I would just say. And as opposed to going into what's going to be Texas and what's going to be Georgia and what's going to be these other states where we don't even know what the best strategy is, because some of the things that are passed won't make any difference, and some things that no one's even paying attention to will all of a sudden blow up. But again, if you had to go into a state, Andrea, where
Virginia's it.
you had a better starting line based on pro participation, you couldn't pick a better place, although maybe your candidates might have been.
But again, there will be no barriers to getting people to be able to vote. So we will not be fighting that in Virginia. So that's why I said we will embark on an incredibly long and repetitious get out the vote campaign to make sure, right, that people, and again, early voting in Virginia is a new thing. There are so many people who still don't understand that they can begin voting in an election 45 days before the election date. They missed that memo. Those of us who are on this call, so many of us who do work for Reclaim Our Vote, politically, we are the 1%. We are the one who pay attention. We follow, we know what's what. Unfortunately, that is not the average voter, which is why, one last thing on democracy centers, and then I will let you go. We are so delighted to have these democracy centers. They are already getting started on voter registration in South Carolina. They are preparing to go out and start knocking on people's doors. In Georgia, they're writing postcards to their neighbors so that people are A, aware that that democracy center is there, and B, they know what it does. And we are creating trusted voices in communities that frankly haven't had trusted voices probably since the 1960s, when we were at the height of the civil rights movement and there were civil rights organizers in those communities. So we are working one city, one remote rural county at a time to elevate and let communities know who their trusted messengers are. So thank you very, very much, Stephen. Thank all of my folks from Reclaim Our Vote Center for Common Ground for joining us. And hey, Robert, you are the Robert I thought you were from New Orleans.